Well, so my name's Khai, and with me I have Gibson and Sergio, and today we have a special guest, Mr. Kemperer. Is that how you say your last name?
Yes.
And you are a professional musician? Or
Yes, I
something?
came to Austin in 1982 to play music, and I've been playing professionally pretty much since I got out of college.
And your main instrument is a saxophone, correct?
Mainly saxophone. I say woodwinds to include
Woodwinds.
clarinet and flute. And
All
I
right.
also
So, for the first question we'd like to ask is, who is your main inspiration for playing the saxophone?
Well, of course, there's certain iconic saxophone figures in the jazz tradition. So John Coltrane, of course. But my own playing, I developed from clarinet to alto sax to tenor sax. So I've kind of followed a historical trajectory where I really grew up playing Dixieland jazz, and so Sidney Bechet was a big figure, and Benny Goodman on clarinet. And then I got into more swing and listened to Charlie Parker a lot and bebop. And then when I moved to Texas, I really discovered the Texas tenor tradition. And if you're familiar with that,
Yeah.
Stanley Turrentine was a big figure, and a lot of the blues sax players, Junior Walker and Clifford Scott here in Austin. So now it's sort of, they all are part of a tradition. I see them as all voices within a tradition, and I go back and forth between these different influences. I use them every performance. I'll hear Coltrane in my head for a minute, and Stan Getz for a minute, Stanley Turrentine, and in a way, that's rather than them being just sort of background influences, they're very much alive in my playing. I find as I get older, so it's a way that music stays alive with you. So when you say who's an influence, it's like they're really with you.
The when when would you say that you decided music was going to be like the first sure thing you wanted to do?
That's a good question. Really, the way it evolved, and you might be facing this, is I was playing music. I got into playing in jazz bands when I was in high school, and it just seemed a natural thing to do, and I got encouragement from my family that it just seemed a good thing to do, so I never stopped doing it. But that meant I had to give up other things. So like in college, I really couldn't do athletics as much, and if I was going to do music. So it wasn't like I said, I'm going to be a musician. It's just I always felt I was going to play music, and that meant not giving it up, which meant making other things kind of went by the wayside little by little, and music is what has sort of stayed with me my whole life. So I never say that I'm a musician, like that I have a passion for music. It's just that it seems like a natural thing to play music, and if you have to give it up, then that just didn't seem right to me.
Was jazz band like your only like set of music that you would prefer to play, or did you ever play like any other like concert type music besides jazz?
I played a lot of different kinds of music over the years, and it was more just what I was exposed to and the opportunities. So really, I started on classical clarinet, and that was my first for the first 4 years. But then I got into Dixieland jazz, and I had an opportunity to play with a big band. I was only in middle school, but it was a community big band, and that made me realize there was a whole world out there, and that jazz, the sort of trajectory from Dixieland to swing to bebop, I got exposed to a lot of that through these older players, and then playing a lot of blues and more dance type music, blues, soul, R&B, rock, and then later on working more with world music musicians, which jazz is a natural connection to that. So you can get into Latin American music, Middle Eastern, African, Eastern European music, klezmer, all that. And it just was sort of a natural extension of jazz for me. So the older I get, the more I just think of myself as a musician rather than a particular genre.
Do you compose your own music?
Yeah, I do write a lot of songs, and well, you're a guitar player,
Yeah.
and I started out like a lot of jazz instrumentalists. Most of my songs were instrumental compositions and the jazz idiom, but then I started writing lyrics, and it's been the biggest challenge in maybe the last 10 years is as a songwriter, you have to be able to perform your songs. So you have to sing, even if you're not a good singer. You have to turn your voice into an instrument at least well enough to be able to present the song or record it, and so people can hear it. Because I'd say, I have the song I wrote, and what does it sound like? Well, I can't sing it. So the last 10 years I've really worked on my singing so that I can present my compositions, even if eventually I want a professional singer to do it. But I recommend that. Work on your singing, no matter what your musical goals you got. Use your voice too.
When you're composing music, do you usually write for other people, or do you also write for maybe for a concert school, for like a middle school band or maybe high school bands or
That's
such
a
like
good
that?
question. Most of my experience has been, I'll write a song, which is, for me a song is a melody and some kind of harmonic structure, rhythmic structure. But then when you're talking about how is it going to be performed or expressed, then you're talking about the arrangement, the orchestration. And most of my experience has been with small groups, jazz combos or rock, pop type combos. And just recently I've expanded working with a string quartet and sort of larger, maybe octet or larger, but I wouldn't say big band. So and that's something I haven't attempted yet, is to write for orchestra or for big band.
So I'm a saxophone player, and I don't know if this is just like a concert problem sometimes, or if it happens in jazz. But like, do you ever?
Are you talking about alto and tenor?
Yeah. Do you ever feel like, I don't know how to say it, but
You got it.
Well, you're talking earlier about your own instrument, that you started on alto and you went to tenor.
oh, how about let's say this? How about let's just say this? Do you ever I can't say it. Do you ever regret like switching from clarinet to alto when they first switched you?
Well, I have regrets every day, but it's more like think of it more like the back burner. You say, I've got my clarinet playing is on the back burner because I play more saxophone, and I pick up the clarinet and the technique is not where I want it to be, so it's a regret. But it's not like, if only I had, it's like I try not to think like that, because you just got to keep moving forward. So think of it as a back burner. Say, well, I really want, my chops on alto to be better. I set that aside. I'm playing tenor. I'm going to get back to that. And a lot of it is being realistic about what does that involve. Like, what time commitment do you need to get those chops up, or what time commitment do you need to accomplish whatever goal it is, and just try to be realistic about what it is you need to do rather than beat yourself up, because I've done that where you waste a lot of time in your own head beating yourself up about the abstract problem of, I didn't do this, or I should have done that. And when you get back to like just doing it, it's like my students, a lot of them give me all these excuses why they didn't practice or why they can't play this thing. I said, well, that's great, but just get the horn out of the case, get the horn out of the case, put it in your mouth, start making noise. It's like, otherwise you'll have all these regrets or all these abstract ideas in your head about why I'm not doing this, or I should do this, or I don't have time to do this. And you just get the horn out and put it in your mouth and start playing, and then you can assess how much time you're going to need to, whatever it is, like write that song or be able to, perform that piece. Does that make sense?
I had another question.
Okay.
Are you self-taught, or did you hire a bunch of private instructors, or?
I've had kind of a very mixed background. I've had classical clarinet instruction when I was younger for about 4 or 5 years, and I've taken lessons for saxophone in bits and pieces from different people, just one-off lessons. And I've been in a couple jazz bands when I was in high school, and played in a big band in college that helped. But most of that was osmosis. I sort of absorbed from playing or just being around musicians, and picked things up, or playing along with records. I taught myself a lot. and getting yelled at. That's always helpful. Like being in a band they tell me what not to do, and then little by little you learn what to do. So it's a real mixture, and I'd say anybody who you're taking lessons, or you're trying to learn from somebody, that you need that, but it's always, the music's always going to be coming from within you, so you're always going to be self-taught to some extent, because you have to put the pieces together and you have to do the work. You know, and you can try to follow a formula or just do what the teacher says, but that's only the first step. It's like they can show you how to use the tools, but you really have to do the work. So I've learned that over the years, that like, in a sense, you're always going to be self-taught, because you've got to assemble all these different influences and figure out what's your own sound, what, you know. And that leads into these bigger questions like, what do you want to do with the music? Because you could spend your whole life practicing, never leave your apartment, and just practice. And that would be a noble thing to do, but you'll never, it's infinite. You know, you can just keep learning and adding and discovering new things. So if you say, okay, what do I want to accomplish with this? Then that's the first step to being self-taught. It's like, say you want to write a song, you want to be a songwriter, you're going to have to work on your voice as an instrument, and just just say, okay, and you can do very pragmatic exercises to do that, and set a goal, and 6 months down the road you'll have really come a long way. So when that question about self-taught, in a way it's really about setting your goals, and then you'll start to see what steps you need to get there.
Speaking of practice, you personally, how often or how long do you normally practice a day?
Well, I'm very bad, and I was always a terrible student. The way I practice is I get interested in something, and then I just kind of do it over and over. Like, I've taught myself a lot of music theory by writing songs. I've taught myself piano by trying to learn songs, and I've tried to take a few piano lessons here and there, but really it's when I put the time in, that's when you get the technique. So I was never very good at like saying, oh, I'm going to practice for 3 hours, 4 hours. It's more like I start working on a song, and if I really get into it, 2 hours have gone by. So it's more about taking something and saying, what do I need to do to get it? So if I'm going to be able to play the song that's in the key of B, I got to really work on playing in the key of B. So practice my B scale, my B arpeggios, and all that. If you just say, I got to practice, that's good. The discipline, you need to do that, and it's good to have routines, like go through all your scales, circle of fifths, and all that good stuff. But again, this idea of being self-taught, that's sort of more like a philosophical thing. You got to practice in a way that you internalize it. If you do it because the teacher told me to do it, it'll be mechanical. So in answer to your question, how often do I practice? It depends what I'm working on. So when I was working with the string quartet last summer, I was practicing maybe 3 hours a day on clarinet because I needed to. But now I'm working more on my own original jazz tunes, and so I'm doing more saxophone and actually I spend more time doing songwriting than practicing on a daily basis. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
But it's really more about just putting yourself into it and saying, okay, what do I really need? And what I call stripping away the chatter. Like if you say, I should do this, or I really need to know all this stuff that's going on in your head, you just want to get that direct relationship with the music and say, okay, if I'm going to write this song, I need to learn these chords, and then you get those chords under your fingers so you can really play them. Otherwise, if you say, well, I should really learn to play these chords, but you're not going to do it because you don't have this goal to express yourself with the music. Yeah. You're just doing it because you think that's what you're supposed to do. And that'll lead to that chatter in your head of like, so-and-so's really good, I should be doing this, why I don't want to do this, and you'll argue with yourself. And I don't know if you've experienced that. You find you kind of arguing with yourself instead of actually playing the music.
Sometimes, like when me and my band play, like we try to practice things and try to compose songs together, there's a lot of back and forth on how we should play it, but eventually, we kind of compromise onto something. Yeah,
that's kind of a necessary thing, the process, when you're working with other musicians. my advice there is to be, you have to be in it, and you argue, and no, let's do it this way, and blah, 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 and you waste a lot of time, but you got to do it. But then also try to step back and look at the process of how you're doing it, and say, you know, are you interrupting each other? Are you writing the charts down as you learn the songs, or you're just kind of doing them by memory, and then
We first start like improvising, like the rhythm would start, and then whoever is leading would just play a solo, and then we kind of work with the best parts of that part.
do you record those?
We do record all.
Well, that's good.
All the stuff.
That's better than a lot of people. They just jam. And well, how do we do that? Yeah, but look at the process, and as you, because then over time, you feel like you might have wasted a lot of time, like just jamming or arguing, or you can't remember what you did last week. But if you look at the process of how you're working as a band, you'll start to become more efficient, and that's why I've seen a lot of bands that the individual musicians weren't that great, but the band really sounded good because they put the time in together and they learned how to play together and they developed their own process. So if that's your goal, to have a band and perform as a band, then you got to really work on that process of practicing, and it's worthwhile. I've learned a lot by being in some really terrible bands because you see the way the egos are, you see how ideas, do you get the ideas really worked out? The song always sounds terrible at first, and you gotta work and work and work. Or also conversely, sometimes you get together and jam and it's just magical and you get this great sound, but you're relying on your inspiration, and then you go to do the gig and it sounds terrible because you can't just rely on inspiration. You have to really work out your parts and know exactly how you're gonna interlock all the instruments, and that just takes a lot of time together. But it's worth it if the goal is to be on stage as a band and you can rely on each other. I don't know, have you performed publicly?
Once we performed publicly. We performed a couple of our songs during one of our actual jazz band, so we had some time to spare, and then we played.
How did it go?
Well, we were very nervous.
Yeah.
It was pretty good. We got applauses everywhere.
Good. Yeah, that's the stuff to learn. It's like, pay attention. When you're nervous and your mind goes blank, if you practice together a lot, then you can still sound good.
Yeah.
But if you relied on inspiration and you get on stage and suddenly the monitors don't sound good, the stage lights are blinding you, and then you forget your part. So that's, you've heard that expression, 10,000 hours.
Is that how much practice
if
you
you
need to
put
do good?
10,000 hours into anything, you become an expert. And it's kind of a metaphor, but it's true that the more time you put into whatever project, then when you're under pressure or when you're having to function but things aren't going well, but you've put that time in, and so you can still deliver, you can still make that project come into existence. And that's one of the better lessons I've learned, because I played a lot of gigs where I was sick or something went wrong or something, but because you put all that time in, you can still present that music to the audience, and it's worthwhile.
How important is education in pursuing a music career?
Very. And then the question is, what do you mean by education?
I mean, I guess
Like
maybe
a music school?
music school, or maybe academic-wise or things like that to help pursue your music.
Yeah, I mean those are kind of those questions that it's good to ask, but you got to keep picking the answer apart, because even within a music school, there's going to be different things you get taught. Some are going to be more valuable than others. There's going to be different types of music schools. I'll give you an example, because I've been looking at this question lately. A traditional classical conservatory type curriculum versus Berklee School of Music, which is more commercial music and the business of music, and they're teaching you more career skills about how to use your music as for your career, for putting out a product. So you could go to a conservatory, and if you're going to focus on oboe, and if I'm going to focus on oboe, and you find a really good teacher, and you become very proficient at oboe, but then what are you going to do with it? So you could say, well, it was very important to study in a conservatory setting with very good classical, teachers, so my technique is really good, and I know I'm representing the classical tradition on oboe really well, but that doesn't necessarily translate into me making any money. You might come out, and it happens a lot, people come out with these music degrees, and they're only qualified to teach oboe or work at Burger King.
Right, that makes sense.
Debatable which pays better. So on the other hand, there's a lot of people that make a career in music, but their skill set is much more, they might play guitar or sing, but really they have recording studio experience, or they have business, marketing and promotion experience, and they end up helping other musicians, like they end up designing websites or marketing or being a booking agent or working for recording studio, and so in that sense their commercial training was valuable, so the education was very valuable, but it didn't lead them in the direction they thought. So I know a lot of guys, that like they were going to be rock stars, and they ended up working in marketing for some Sony Records or something. But they made a good living, and they actually made enough money to support their music habit, but they just do that as a hobby, as a performer. So you see what I'm getting at, is that even when you say education is important, but that it's almost like opens a lot of doors. You have to say, well, and again, if you go back to like what are your goals, and trying to be really clear about what motivates you, then you can make these choices later on. It's always good to play music and get as many skills as you can. Never say, my advice is never say, oh, I don't need that. You say, try that, learn about recording studio, microphones, learn about marketing, but, play your instrument, really learn the technique as well as you can. You never know where it's going to lead. But the idea of music education, so really more of a lifelong thing. And I also know a lot of musicians who they played in bands for 10 years, and that was great, and they were touring, but then their career took a sharp turn, and the ones that had diversified skills were able to shift and do something different. They ended up having a family. They didn't think that was going to happen, and so they ended up working for some music marketing company, or managing a nightclub instead of being on the road, that kind of thing. Is this too abstract, or is
No,
this?
it makes sense. It makes sense. So you also said that you were in jazz band freshman year and all that. Were you ever in any concert band in high school, or marching band perhaps?
Yeah, I grew up in the Northeast, and my high school had sort of projects with other schools, so I would play in a concert band, and particularly for Christmas music, or the different seasonal music, and so I got experience playing in orchestral settings and playing like classical repertoire. But then I was also in a jazz combo, and then in college, I said I played in the college big bands, and so I liked it all. It was all a good experience.
Did you also do marching band as well? Or?
I never did marching band. I was
out.
from the Northeast. We're not. It's not a religion like down here. Football.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, I did play in some marching bands, but they were more community bands, and actually the most fun I've had as far as along those lines is more the New Orleans street band, that kind of thing, where it's like more second line. If you're familiar with that, it's like based on marching band music, but it's got the jazz element in it. So. All of that's good. I mean, like I said, all those experiences are good. Some of the best musicians I played with came out of marching band, and they had excellent rhythm and stamina, and so they had good musical skills. A lot of the time, you sort of have to do a trade-off. You say, well, like I've had students that wanted to play in jazz band, but their schools required them to play in marching band. If they wanted to be in jazz band, they also had to be in marching band, which took up a lot of their time. and it's a trade-off, but they got in pretty good shape marching around there.
With the I don't know. Okay, so with the rise of technology in the past 20 years ish, have you ever has anybody ever commissioned your work, or have you ever written anything for a website or a game or?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, there's a lot of what they call the delivery system, or the media, the formats, right? The platforms. And so you have all these different platforms, and they all need soundtrack. So whether it's video games, podcasts, advertising, there's lots of places where people need music, and there's always a need for new stuff. What I found is that, like any of these skills, if you want to do it because it looks glamorous or it looks interesting, you'll find that once you get into it, it requires a lot of specialized skills. So you have to decide, do I really want to do it? Now, I'll give you an example. Something I always was interested in was voiceover work. I always thought that'd be cool to be a voice actor, or to do voices, and I like to do voices. And then I talked with friends that actually do that for a living, and you can't just dabble in it. You really got to do it. It used to be in the old days that that might happen where somebody was making a film or a cartoon or something, and they said, "Hey, I need somebody to do this," and you just called in because you know somebody, you do as a favor, and it's fun, and then suddenly you get work, and then this sort of stories like that. Some of the Simpsons actors, they didn't think they were going to end up being a voice on the Simpsons, and then it became their career. But that really doesn't happen very much. Everything's become so specialized, and there's so many people trying to get in that if you decide you want to do something, you got to really research it and say, okay, I really want to do this, so I'm going to have to really work on those skills. So, for example, writing, I thought it would be fun to write songs for soundtrack, and then it's there's a lot of money there if you can get it, but it's really sewed up. There's a few people that get most of the money, and then there's people that get, maybe $1,000 for this or something over there, but you got to really be ready. You have to have an extensive library of, say you wanted to submit a soundtrack, new TV show, we want something kind of Huey Lewis and the News, but or something like horn heavy or Motown sounding, and you can't just say, oh, I'm going to write something. As soon as you say, I'm going to write something, somebody has already submitted. So you got to have an extensive library of your own material, and you have to have it set up in 30 seconds and 1 minute and 3 minute chunks, and have it all edited, and it's mastered and it's ready to go. And then you send it, and they say, well, yes, but can you change this? And yeah, and you can do it. And you got to be able to do it, right then and do it well, because if you don't, there's a bunch of people that have already got that. So I know people in Austin that they do make some money doing that, and they got their home studio, and they submit these jingles and soundtrack songs, and it sounds fun, right? But you got to really do it. So again, you have to research it and say, what's the time commitment, and do I really want to do this? And you might find, yes, you do. For me, it was nah, I'm not going to do that. It's a nice, the voiceover thing. I'd love to do that, but I'm not going to stop what I'm doing now and dedicate myself to that. So instead, I go, well, I do want to do that. How can I do it in my own way? So what I've done is I have 5 CDs of my own music. So it's already mastered. It's all ready to go. And I've found different projects, mostly nonprofits that are doing videos, and they need soundtrack music for those. And so I'll get credit. My song will be on that soundtrack of whatever their project is. Might have been a short movie or an informational thing about some environmental project or something. And I get my music on the soundtrack, so I get that experience. I'm not getting paid for it, but it's worthwhile to do, and I learn from it. And I've been commissioned by a few friends who are doing independent films to give them some soundtrack for certain scenes. And I just did it, and if they ever that film ever made some money, maybe I'd see some 30 years from now. But the experience was really good. And so if you say, I want to do it, you can find a way to do it. But I found if you're trying to like jump into a market and say, I'm going to make a bunch of money, being doing television jingles, it's not going to happen unless you like really put a lot of work into it. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you find the project interesting, you can find a way to do it. And it'll add to your skill set and your resume and all that. So it's worth doing. But don't let the money be like the starting point. Let the creative process and what the project involves. If it motivates you, then do it. That kind of makes sense?
Yeah. Has the jazz scene changed since you started to like now? Like, has it evolved in some way?
I was going to have my water, but oh well.
Not water?
No. Yes and no. I mean, jazz was commercial music, in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, but since then it's been art music that sometimes you get hired to play for dances and things, but it's not very profitable as a music form. If you wanted to make money playing music, then jazz is not the first one to go to. So in that sense, it really hasn't changed. It's like it doesn't pay that well. There's not that many gigs available, and most people in the world don't listen to jazz, or if they do, they don't realize they're listening to jazz. They hear it on a soundtrack, on a movie. So in that sense, it hasn't changed. In another sense, it's always changing. There's always ups and downs. And I found that by being a very versatile musician, I get a lot of work in different ways. So, for example, there's more private parties. There's, I think, the growth in population, and there's all kinds of events. There's corporate events and people getting married, and birthday parties, and all different kinds of things. We're going to do a 1920s Prohibition style theme party, right? And I get that a lot. So they want Dixieland and swing music for that. Or, we're going to do Vegas night, so we need like the Frank Sinatra kind of thing. So there's always gigs like that. And so if you have the jazz skills and you have the musicians, you can get work like that. So in that sense, the jazz scene is, as far as like the skills you need as a jazz musician, you can make money by playing for these private parties or commercial gigs. The jazz clubs, they're always coming and going. There's like it's part of American culture, but it's not like it's supported in any meaningful way. Just like playing jazz clubs. The one thing I would say is consistently growing is jazz studies, and so first it was just they would have. When I was growing up, this is like in the 70s, early 80s, they would have jazz programs or jazz classes in the college and universities, but they didn't offer very many jazz studies degrees. And then that changed, so now most colleges have jazz studies. You can get a master's or a PhD in jazz studies. And then that has actually led to more support in the high schools. So most high schools have jazz bands. When I was growing up, we didn't have that. It was like you might have as a sort of a side project, but now they're actually funded. So that means there's more work for jazz teachers who want to teach jazz band. I have a friend who got hired in Shanghai, China, teaching at an international middle and high school jazz. All he does is teach jazz band, and that's pretty good. That international, and that there's enough interest to support, just jazz. He doesn't have to teach classical and other types of music. There's enough there to teach jazz. So jazz studies in the academic, whatever you want to call it, sector, the academic economy, that is consistently growing. So if you said you wanted to be a jazz educator and maybe band director, then yeah, that seems to be, the funding is always up and down for education anyway, but jazz studies is being seen as a serious thing that most schools want to have that. Is that help.
Yeah.
How should you market yourself as a musician?
That's a good question. What I've done badly is that I've played all kinds of music, and I think of myself as being a musician that can like fit in wherever I go, and it's great. But on the other hand, I'm terrible at marketing myself because I'm too eclectic and too broad. So lately, I've been trying to market my bands, be very clear. You know, is this a jazz band? Is this a world music band? Is this a Motown soul band? And then you find the market for that. So what most successful musicians do is they find the market that they want to be in, and they get their identity or their brand, and they are very clear about it. So, on the other hand, I just don't think that's really how music is. You know, it's like unless you're going to be a country singer and then you're going to have the cowboy hat, and that's what you want to be. Or people are scratching their heads all the time about Kenny G, because I don't know if you know the story behind Kenny G, that he was one of the first investors in Starbucks. So even before he was, making big records, he had plenty of money. So he didn't have to play smooth jazz. So obviously he liked it. But he was very good at marketing himself, right? So if you say Kenny G, everybody knows exactly what that sounds like. You just have to say his name. But, I'll give you a counterexample. I've seen her career. Nora Jones, you familiar with her?
I don't think so.
There, rest my case. So Nora Jones, excellent piano player and singer, jazz background, and she was the best-selling Blue Note artist back in mid 2000s, but her record was really not jazz. It was sort of lounge pop with some jazz influence. And it was the #1 selling jazz record in the U.S. that year. And then she went on and tried a different approach. And her next record was sort of like, still a little bit jazzy, but had more like alt rock in it. And so each time she was sort of exploring her own musical growth, which is great for her, but it got hard to market her. And I remember seeing this. She was on, after her first Blue Note album, she was booked at all these festivals and, 1,500 to 3,000 seat theaters, and then she wasn't filling them. And then she was playing the 600 seat and 350 seat theaters, and they were having trouble marketing her. So compare Kenny G, you can immediately identify from his name, exactly what he sounds like. Nora Jones, it's like, what does she sound like? And see, well, she plays piano and sings, and so that's a good question. Now, on the other hand, if you don't care, if you say, I'm going to follow my own, trajectory as an artist and just keep growing and changing, then that's great, because your life in music is going to be always growing and evolving, but you may not be able to market yourself very easily. So it's a good question. I don't think there's one answer to it. It's more like you have to find your own answer.
So from high school till now in your music career, what would you say your best experience is so far?
That's a good question. Well, there's different, it's almost like different scales. Like my best gig was 1990 to 1997. I played with Marcia Ball. She's lives here in Austin. She's a piano player, singer. Her sound is New Orleans blues and Texas blues and a little bit of rock and roll. And so we played on the blues circuit mostly, but I really enjoyed her sound and I learned a lot from her. And we played all over the world, and I was in front of 20,000 people sometimes, these huge festivals. And so as far as my visibility and my sort of like feeling like I was really a musician in the world, that was the high point. But it was also just a gig, because then you wake up Monday morning and it's like, okay, what am I doing now? So that what they call ephemeral, if you know that word. It's like these things happen, but they don't necessarily signify that now you've made it. It's like It's just that's what happened then. So I found other meaningful experiences in music. Teaching has been a very meaningful one. So that's more like incremental. Like I've taught hundreds of students over the years, and some of them have gone on to become really good musicians. And I've just felt like I've touched a lot of people's lives, helped people through teaching music. So that's more like of a long-term, meaningful experience. Not, rock star thing, but it's like sitting in a little cubicle and teaching somebody how to play the C scale. But, over time, that stuff is very meaningful too. I think being here in Austin, another more like incremental experience. I've spent so many years playing here, and I've made so many friends and been involved in so many projects that becomes more meaningful over time. I realize that now I do feel like a musician because my life has been about music, and I have all these friends, and we've done all this music together, and I'm part of that Austin music tradition. So there's something in that. You can't put a value on it. It's like still just getting paid, the same amount of money I was getting paid when I first got here. That's the typical bar musician story in Austin. But it's the contribution to the community has been really meaningful. And that's something that, like, if you find a community you can be part of, it's like, and you put in the time, you'll feel that, and you feel like it's giving back to you over the years. So those are kind of three different experiences. And then there's you're playing your instrument and you're on stage, and some nights are just great. You just feel it, and you just feel like the spirits have invested you, and it's happening. And what do you say about that? It's just, that's just happening right then. And again, it's like the next day you pick up your horn. It's like, it's not happening. But you look for those moments when you feel like a vessel and the music is speaking through you. So that's also those moments are momentary, but they're meaningful too. Do you have any questions about sort of like what you like to do with music? Or?
What we like to do?
Yeah. Like, let me ask you a question, because I played a lot of kinds of music, and I've connected to a lot of traditions. But like, where is it going now? Like, so we're all looking to you, like the next generation. Like, what are you gonna do?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
I don't know what I want to do, but
I mean, for me personally, I've only been kind of stuck on that concert setting because I've always played with the big band ever since in middle school up until now. So I've always been stuck with, playing in a big band, always playing like certain pieces with everybody and all that. But for me, with me being such a big band and stuff like that, and watching how like the conductor is doing all his things with us students, like what I want to do with my music is I want to elevate it into where I can become a director myself to help, I guess, teach my knowledge or show my knowledge of music towards other students, so that way I can teach more kids and then make more music with a bunch of them. I think that's where I see with my music going, is I can see myself being a band director and then just be just teaching around. So that's me personally.
Well, then I have a question for you, because I've seen this just in the time of teaching. The repertoire for band has changed and expanded. And then also, like I said, there's now jazz band in middle and high school, and there didn't used to be that. And so there's you can have classical repertoire, you can have sort of your Western pop repertoire, like show tunes and things like that, and then jazz. And those are all being taught in middle and high school, which I think is great, that culturally it's really expanded. But then the question is, where would it go? It's like, are you going to be maintaining these traditions, teaching, classical music, or big band jazz? Are you going to be incorporating music from other sources? Do you think about that? Like, because you also have this clarinet and oboe, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, now that, because there is middle schools and high school bands that are doing, like, jazz bands. It's not just classical music, like it's such a big band. And now that high schools are all over doing marching band, I guess I want to showcase, like, when I'm a director, when there's a time for marching season, I want to showcase like show tunes and like pep songs for like the audience and football games and things like that for marching season. And then once it gets to the concert season, right now, as an example, then that's when I'll probably start laying low from all the crazy and fun stuff to do. And we'll play classical music, and then we'll have like a side jazz band where we can teach jazz music for those who are interested in jazz band. And then those who are, want to just stay in the big band, we can just teach all of that. And then I guess we'll just do that. That's my goal, I guess, is just be able to teach all 3 elements, but like also I'm trying to like maintain a little tradition so that way I can be stable.
That's great. And that's what I'm sort of indicating, is that just even though you're talking about music that's already in the curriculum, it's like concert band, jazz band, marching band, that's already pretty broad. And so one of the skill sets you're going to need is to have a real extensive knowledge of repertoire, and so to keep up on, because there's always like the latest whatever, Lady Gaga, whatever tune it's like gets translated into marching band, and to be up on that, it's like that you're going to be the way that these young musicians get access to that. And so that's kind of it's a cool thing, because even though your job could be very clearly defined, you're going to be bringing influences from a lot of different sources. So that could be like a really important cultural role to play.
Oh.
Yeah, how about you?
Well, since middle school, it was when I started band in 6th grade, middle school. It like the question gets rise a lot. Like, what do you want to do with your life as your career? And what I wanted first was, I didn't know what I wanted until 7th grade, where I decided I wanted to be a band director. But then I started doing a little. I mean, not. I still kept going with band, and I started getting a little disinterested because on the side, at my house, I was playing a lot of games at the time, and like I've been discovering a lot of technology because my brother at this time would have brought us a computer. It was an old computer, like those big ones, It was an old computer, and I like playing games on it, like those old games on the computer, and then I had a bunch of these old consoles, and I thought that was really nice. So it was until 8th grade where I figured out that I wanted to be a game designer. I wanted to work with technology and stuff like that, and that's what it was. And I had music as a hobby. And and when I got to high school, I was pursuing more technology and bands like 2nd or 3rd, and like my skill was really like it plateaued to a point where like it wasn't really. I got better each year, but like nothing too. I wasn't getting too good. And so this year, where I was like, I still want to do technology, but I've gone to the point where I know decent amount of technology, and band is getting a little more fun. So I tried. I actually applied myself this year, and I've noticed like a bunch of growth. And there are times in band where it's not always the funnest. Like being a tenor player, I don't always get to play, the fun parts. I usually, play support, which it's all right. But my career is also getting a little foggy still because I wanted to be a game designer, but it's gone to the point where like I still want to have music in my life. It's just I want to pursue technology more, and so what I when I'm designing games, if I ever do get the chance to do it, I'll kind of want to try being making music for a game, because music for popular games, if I ever make a popular game, they can be very like iconic. I don't know if you know any of these popular games, but there's a game called Legend of Zelda, whereas its main theme is very popular, and like Kenji Kondo, is that? I don't remember, but I just remember it as the Zelda theme. The Mario Bros theme, that's also very popular. And for me specifically, the Legend of Zelda series always had great music, and if I ever, like I said, if I ever do create video games to that scale, I want to make music that's like impactful and that like it's relevant to what's happening during the game. And I just want to make music feel. I want to make them feel what I want them to feel through my music,
Yeah.
through like what's happening on the screen, and I just want everything like balanced to the
I
point.
think you're living in a good period because to have the skills as a game designer or technology skills and music skills used to be, those two things are very separate, but now there's a lot of people that are doing both, and you might find new pathways. Like, I'll just give you an example. Some of the best apps that are designed, they're like designed by techno geek guys, but who are also musicians. So I use this one called iReal Pro, if you're familiar with it.
No.
And it's one of the best music education apps, and it's very, very useful. And it has to be something that is designed by a musician because it's designed for musicians to use. And so to have those two pathways can really go together. My advice would be to look at people that have been doing this and sort of see how they did it. And just get examples. One guy I'd recommend, Robert Rodriguez, a filmmaker. He's based here in Austin. Spy Kids.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh.
yeah.
Now we know.
So he does his own music. He's a musician, and he does the music for his movies. And so it's a good example of you don't have to give up music in order to do programming, or and again, this idea of like, where are we going with platforms, the difference between video game, app, movie, TV, it's like they're all almost not converging, but that like the boundaries between these are kind of dissolving. This role-playing games that they're making into movies and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I think really it's you work on your skills. Just keep working on music, working on your computer skills and programming skills and all that. But do research on what people that have made a career out of it, like can learn from that. So then again, to take it out of the abstract and not just have it be these questions floating in your head, but say, okay, say to check out Robert Rodriguez and look at what he did and what he the decisions he made, and then how did he go about it? Like when he started doing I think what he did was he wrote a lot of the songs for a soundtrack, and then he hired musicians, but he might have even controlled the recording process. I'm not even sure. We can like look into that, look at his interviews with him, and that'd be good research, just because then you could sort of see. Otherwise, you end up reinventing the wheel. You say, I'm going to do this, and you say, I'm going to do this and this and this, and then you realize somebody already did it. And if you had looked at how they did it, you could have learned from it. So, not sure who else to look at, but I know there's several game designers in Austin that are also musicians. You might just start looking at that.
What
See
about you,
who's around
Gibson?
About me?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I can put music into an engineering career, but
That's your other interest?
yeah. I studied like architecture for a couple, well, since we had an architecture program since freshman year, and I've been in it for a while now.
So architecture is, or when you say engineering, what do you?
I don't know. I want to just create something, like really, with like a building or a little mechanical lever or something.
Design.
It's a design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that, if I might just interrupt, that really gets into the question of aesthetics, which is and that's sort of my academic background, where again, you might have music over here and architecture and engineering over here, but there's a thread that might connect them that you'll find when you start researching, like if you research architecture, different periods of history, and you'll see, there was a certain aesthetic or a certain kind of philosophy going on, like Frank Lloyd Wright or something like that. You say, well, what was the aesthetic going on? And you'll see that there was actually an aesthetic that was going into the music of the time and the architecture of the time, that they were connected. And so your musical skills might help you in architecture and engineering as far as giving you perspective and be able to see what the bigger themes that people are dealing with, and then that might make you more marketable as just far as like this guy's intelligent, he knows what he's talking about. You know, you're like, you say, I want to design a building that whatever people can feel free in, and then I'll design the soundtrack that goes with it.
For the building, soundtrack for the building.
Yeah, shaped like a guitar. But you know what I mean? It's like the idea of aesthetics then is really, it's not just this art class thing. It's really like seeing what's motivating you musically and what's motivating you, you know, as far as architecture and engineering, the creative ideas going on that can really be linked. And so you might, and people who've done that, I mean, sometimes it gets a little, I don't want to say it's flaky, but where they're artistic and they learn how to brand themselves and market themselves. And it's a little bit like they're, you know, they're making this like pitch. And I'm trying to give you an example. I mean, I like their music and I don't have anything really bad to say about them, but like, you remember the Talking Heads? Does that ring a vague bell? There's some other bands like that from the 80s. And they were like musicians, but they were actually art students. And so they were as much about their costuming and the album cover art and the way the stage looked. It was really about the presentation of this act. And they used their skills as art students along with the actual music. And so, you know, sometimes it can get flaky where it's all about image and packaging and stuff. But it's also can be real because it's an aesthetic that you're trying to connect. And I think that's part of the music. It's like, you know, why should music be limited to just like the technique of making it? It's like you're also thinking about how you're going to present it, like how people are going to see it, so which turns into your clothes and the stage and where do you perform, and all that is really, it doesn't have to just be, you know, packaging. It can be really a sincere part of the creative process. That makes sense. So just to say, you know, if you're interested in engineering and music, there's no reason why they have to be separate. They can influence each other. It just depends like how you conceive of it. And then again, once you start thinking about this, you'll realize that other people have done this, and you can go learn from them. So I just, you know, picked David Byrne, Talking Heads, as an example, just because they were very conscious of their look and the way they sort of like created their image. Is he going to come in and stop us, or we're just going to go until it gets dark?
I don't know. I think so. I have one last question for you. Like, now that your like music career is like way out there and things like that, and how professional, do you still see yourself doing music or any like music like theory in like 5 years from now or 10 years from now?
Yeah, the more I go and sort of follow this path that I've just sort of found, the more it makes sense. Like all the pieces of my life are fitting together, but it also doesn't make sense monetarily. It's like I don't have any better, you know, way of making money than I did when I was like in my 20s. But all the pieces of the puzzle have much more meaning to me now. And this is a thing you'll see in these, if you look at books on careers in music and how to make it in the music business, there tends to be this sort of playoff between marketing yourself and your product and what community, what's the purpose of your music? Are you trying to be part of a community or build a community or contribute to a community? And I found that as I get older, the more I think about myself as part of a community, or that my musical contribution is adding to a community, the more clear it makes sort of my career trajectory. And I actually have been able to make more consistent money because I'm making connections with people that think my music is worthwhile and will support me. So for example, I've done more crowdfunding projects like GoFundMe and Indiegogo and stuff like that. And where I'll like have a music project, but I'm pitching it because it's like I think it's a worthwhile thing, and then people donate to it because I think, yeah, this is worth supporting. So for example, I do a Festivus concert every year. It's this Festivus is this made-up winter holiday, kind of like Christmas, but it's all made up. And I do a fundraiser for Austin Children's Shelter, and so I make enough money to pay the band, and if I have to rent the theater or whatever, but then the rest of the money goes to the Austin Children's Shelter, and people like it, and so I'm doing it as a community project, but I get the money to fund it, to keep it going, and so it works out well. And this other one, he asked me to mention this. I just got grant money from the city of Austin to do concerts for the elderly, and so I've been performing in a lot of retirement homes in the last 10 years, and I saw this need for not just performing for the elderly, but to engage them, to have them provide a way that they can sort of participate more, not just sit there and listen. So part of the grant is to have a video team to interview them about the music and let them talk about their memories and their experiences and what the music means to them. And that helps us as musicians and anybody that's interested in the music to see how much the music means to them. And these are people that heard the songs when they first, were written in 1930s, 40s, 50s. So we can learn some history from them. So that project, I get some grant money from the city, and I get some other sources for it. But the purpose of it is to just do something that's, cool and interesting for the community. And I learned something from it too. So I see myself doing more of those kind of projects, and then I'll find ways to fund them, but the purpose is to do something that's cool for the community. And I can see myself growing old doing that.
Have you ever emotionally attached yourself to a song that you've played, or a song that you've made?
Oh yeah, you're in for a ride there, because songs that are just going to get more emotionally meaningful as you get older, and you'll hate it and like it at the same time. The song will make you start crying. I don't want to cry. But yeah, just to give you an example, the song Stardust, it's an old jazz standard, and my dad really liked that song. So he passed away last year. And so now that song, which I always associated with him anyway, but now every time I play it, I think about him, and it's emotionally. So it's hard to play it, but it's really great too, because the song has so much meaning to it. So that'll happen more and more.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have, because we do have
Yeah.
about 4 minutes left until our next class.
Okay.
So,
Good. Well, I think we covered a
thank
lot
you
of
for
ground.
joining us and giving us the
Yeah.
opportunity to talk to you and things like that.
My pleasure.
And congratulations also on all your success as well.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, we'll be watching you to see. We're going to be playing in your band when.
Feel free to stop by the band hall, next year, because that's where we're going to be
Yeah,
headed
that's
to.
where
So
us
if you
two
want to
are
listen
going.
to,
Oh, you'll be
us
playing?
play,
Okay.
let's play for a little bit.
Stop in. And I'll leave information, but I host a jazz jam once a month, and this Concerts for the Elderly, it's a 2-year program. What I'd like to do is get more young musicians to come in and participate in some of these concerts. So
That's cool.
I do them all around Austin.
All right.
So, cool.
Well, thank you.
Cool. Thank you.